Today I have for you one of the rarest of all chess games. Now we've all seen brilliant masterpieces where the winning side sacrifices one or two pieces, maybe three pieces, maybe even the queen, and it causes us to marvel and dream of creating something so immortal ourselves. But have you ever seen a game in which every piece was sacrificed? Actually, that's a pretty common thing to see among beginners, but have you ever seen a game where not only was every piece sacrificed, but every sacrifice was 100% sound and led to the victory of the sacrificing side? Well, I have seen such a thing but once in my entire life, and that is in the game that I am about to show you. This is from the year 1993. The place is St. Petersburg, Russia. On the white end, we have a grandmaster by the name of Grigory Serper, who at the time of this game was in his early 20s and among the top 100 players in the world. His opponent is a very strong Greek grandmaster by the name of Ioannis Nikolaitis. The time control is classical, and Grigory Serper opens this incredible game with c4, the English opening. Nikolaitis responds g6, known as the Great Snake variation, an opening named after the serpentine-like pawn structure that this can supposedly lead to. Not to say that almost every opening pawn structure doesn't look rather serpentine, but that's just me. Play continues e4, which, unlike the more popular d4, this encourages black to now stake his claim in the center with either c5 or e5, but Nikolaitis sticks to his hyper-modern approach, opting to influence the center from afar with bishop to g7. And so after d4, the opening has modulated into a modern defense. This opening allows white to temporarily achieve his dream of an uncontested central monopoly, but it's not to last. Nikolaitis continues with the most popular move, d6, preparing to challenge that behemoth center with either c5 or e5. Next, we have some natural development of the ponies with knight to c3 and knight to f6, bringing us to the second opening transposition of this game, as we now have a King's Indian defense on the board. Serper now takes a well-known exit from the main opening interstate with the move knight g to e2. Knight to f3 is much more popular, but this is an interesting alternative that is played now and then at the very highest level. With this move, white is playing for an ultra-solid center, keeping the move f3 on the table to support e4. f4 is still an option as well. The drawback, of course, is that he's placed his knight on a less active square, blocking diagonals for both his bishop and queen. Nikolaitis responds by putting his knight on a less than ideal square now with the move knight b to d7. It's not a bad move per se, but most players prefer to just castle, play c5, and then develop their knight to the more active c6 square, assuming that white doesn't play d5 first. But after knight to g3 from Serper, we discover that the plan is not to play c5, but rather c6, transposing back into what looks like some sort of a modern defense, as indicated by black's pawns on c6 and d6. Serper continues bishop to e2, which, unlike bishop to d3, maintains a view of the center with the queen and prepares to meet e5 with d5 when knight to c5 will not come with a tempo on the bishop as it would if it were on d3. On the other hand, if black were to now play h5, which at this point is his strongest move, then he'd be threatening h4, driving the g3 knight back to f1 as the e2 square is no longer available. Nikolaitis does not play h5 though, he opts for a6, preparing some queenside expansion with b5. This is a bit too slow according to the engine, which is now giving f4 followed by e5 with a significant advantage to white. But Serper goes with the less aggressive bishop to e3, once again giving black a free hand to strike first with either b5 or h5. The engine slightly prefers b5 at this point, but Nikolaitis goes with h5, which is respectable enough, threatening to kick the g3 knight back with h4. Now the best move for white here is still f4, preparing e5 to attack the f6 knight, but Serper plays f3, which is unnecessarily passive. Best for black now is an immediate h4, forcing the knight to f1, but after the slightly less accurate b5 from Nikolaitis, Serper now has the chance to castle, which he doesn't do, but this is the best way to meet the threat of h4, since here white has knight to h1, headed for f2, which is going to be more conducive to harmonious piece development than having the knight on f1, where its prospects are more limited. I mean, it could go to d2, but white would much rather reserve that square for his queen. So anyway, getting back to the game. Serper, in this position, does not castle like he should, but instead plays the unfortunate c5, which is not necessarily a decisive blunder, but it is a significant inaccuracy, according to the engine, in what is otherwise a virtually flawless performance. I'm not sure exactly what Serper was thinking with this move. Did he not like the looks of b takes c4 followed by d5? Who knows? But after c5, d takes c5, and d takes c5, Nicolaitis now has queen to c7, placing his queen on this newly opened and highly useful diagonal pointed straight at white's kingside. However, he should have first played h4, driving the g3 knight back to f1 while he had the chance, because after Serper castles and Nicolaitis now plays h4, here he's able to put his knight on that preferable h1 square, headed to f2 next. Black is still the preferred side though, with the engine giving moves like knight to e5 or even knight to f8 looking to reroute to e6, which is what Nicolaitis actually tries in a couple of moves. What's played here though is knight to h5, another inaccuracy, to which white should respond f4, but instead we have queen to d2. Okay, it prevents knight to f4, that's important, but unlike the move f4, this allows black to play knight to e5, and then if white plays f4, there's knight to g4 defended by the bishop. That's not ideal for white, but Nicolaitis now makes a strange decision to put a pawn on e5 instead, blocking his dark squared bishop's diagonal, which needless to say is far from ideal, but he does have a plan, and it would be a pretty good plan if it could be accomplished just a bit more quickly. Serper plays his knight to f2, and now we have knight to f8, looking for that reroute to e6, after which black will have a lot of really nice dark squared control with d4 and f4 on lockdown. Now if white were to continue with some stereotypical move here like rook to d1, then the move knight to e6 would pretty much equalize the position. So Serper knows that it's time to be proactive. He's significantly ahead in development, black's king is still in the center, so if that means anything at all, now is the time to prove it. Serper now proceeds to do just that as he finds the only move in this position that gives white an advantage. Pause the video if you'd like to try to spot it. Serper's move is a4, threatening to capture on b5, with the discovered pin on the a6 pawn to the undefended a8 rook. If black addresses that, then white can even sacrifice a piece on b5 with the winning advantage. So Nicolaitis is looking at this position and he's probably thinking, why would I allow such dangerous nonsense when I can just play b4 and force your knight to move backwards? Looks logical. Only trouble is, that does not force the knight to move backwards. And this is a very instructive position, because as white, if you retreat, then you're pretty much conceding that black has gotten away with his irresponsible behavior of neglecting his development, leaving his king in the center, which is what makes this position a prime candidate for a potential sacrifice. So there's a big clue for you as to what's coming next. Feel free to pause and ponder, but here it comes. The move Serper now plays to kick off his immortal sacrificial onslaught is knight to d5, attacking the black queen. If the queen moves, then if nothing else, white can just grab the pawn on b4 with the winning position, although jumping into b6 might even be stronger, depending on where the black queen goes. So the move Nicolaitis plays, c takes d5, just accepting the sacrifice, is probably the best try, but after e takes d5, Serper now has two extremely dangerous connected passed pawns on black's side of the board. He's threatening things like knight to e4, followed by knight to d6 with check. The b4 pawn is still under attack. The engine is suggesting that black just give the piece right back now with knight to e6, which is probably still losing, but it would have offered black much better prospects than what's tried in the game, f5. This does threaten the move f4, which would trap white's bishop, but after d6, hitting the queen, and queen to c6, just trying to blockade these troublesome intruders, it's now time for sacrifice number 2 with, what do you think it is? There's a couple of possibilities here, but only one of them is any good. Are you ready for this? The move is bishop to b5, which is about as forcing as they come, attacking the queen with a pin to the king. So a takes b5 is absolutely necessary, but after a takes b5, the queen is again attacked, as well as the rook on a8. So black's gotta play queen to b7 to maintain defense, right? Well, Nicolaitis actually rejected this move since after c6, queen to b8, still defending, rook takes a8, and queen takes a8, white has queen to d5, defending c6, and so preparing b6 and then b7, when this passed pawn trio is just going to be impossible for black to deal with. If bishop to e6, then there's d7 check, which is very bad, since if the pawn is captured, then the recapture comes with check and black loses his queen. Nicolaitis could see that this was hopeless, and so in the game, after a takes b5, he decides his best chance is to just let his rook go and grab the pawn on b5. Serper, of course, takes the rook. We have queen to c6, getting back in front of the passed pawn while attacking white's rook. Serper doubles up on the a file with rook f to a1, defending, but here comes that move f4, attacking the bishop on e3, which has nowhere to go. So it seems that white is going to lose another piece. Serper is unfazed though, and he just plows ahead with rook 1 to a7, threatening rook to e7 check, driving black's king to d8, followed by queen takes b4, and then queen to a5 check, which would actually force checkmate. He's also threatening queen to d5, attacking the black queen, since if queen takes d5, then rook takes c8 would be checkmate. Nicolaitis can see that these threats must be dealt with, and so he plays knight to d7, answering both by blocking the 7th rank. And what do you think Serper does now? You guessed it, he sacrifices. This time it's the exchange with rook takes c8 check. What does this accomplish? Well, it draws the black queen away from her view of d5, so that after queen takes c8, Serper has queen to d5. Nicolaitis captures the bishop on e3, which is probably the best try in his now utterly hopeless position, but now we have queen to e6 check. Black only has 2 legal moves here. If king to d8, then queen to e7 is check and mate, so king to f8 is forced, removing defense from the knight on d7, which white can now capture with rook takes d7. However, his knight on f2 is still under attack. Now if white were to play knight to e4 here instead, then black would have no good way to save his knight on d7, since if it moves, then queen to f7 would be checkmate, and if defense is added with knight to f6, then knight to g5 threatening mate again on f7 is quite crushing and actually forces checkmate in 3 moves, which I'll leave for you to work out if you want to. But I wanted to mention the fact that white is able to win the knight on d7 without giving up his knight on f2 in order to demonstrate that Serper's decision to now play rook takes d7 is technically another piece sacrifice, and a winning one, allowing e takes f2 check, now played by Nicolaitis. And what do you think white should do here? Take the pawn on f2 and allow black to force checkmate in 12 moves beginning with queen takes c5 check? No chance Serper is falling for that. He puts his king on f1. This does allow queen to a6 check, but then after king takes f2, black has run out of good checks, and white is still threatening checkmate on f7, to which there is no good defense. Nicolaitis knows that he needs to address that, and the only reasonable way to do so is with queen to e8, guarding f7. And for the moment, it looks like black has decent prospects. He is 2 pieces up, for which white has his extra pawn and of course these 2 very dangerous passers, but it's not so obvious that white is winning here. And it's virtually unthinkable that Serper would have been able to envision this position when he made his first sacrifice of the game. Yet here he is, with a single winning move at his disposal. Can you spot it? It is a sacrifice of the rook with rook to f7 check. Incredible. Black only has 2 legal moves. Obviously, you can't play king to g8 or your queen falls, so Nicolaitis grabs the rook with queen takes f7, but here we go with queen to c8 check. Black can only block with the queen, but now comes d7, attacking the queen, threatening to promote the pawn. What are you going to do? Well, if you're black, you're going to lose your queen. There's just no way out of it. It's just a matter of how you want to do it. You can take on c8 when, of course, white replaces his queen with a new queen, or there's what's played in the game, king to f7. This way, after pawn takes queen with promotion, at least the rook can get out of the corner with the recapture, and despite having lost his queen, Nicolaitis is still significantly up in material. So white's path to victory is very narrow here. Serper continues with his only winning move, queen to b7 check. It's blocked with rook to e7, attacking the queen, but now comes c6. putting that last piece on the chopping block. If black accepts the sacrificed queen with rook takes b7, then after c takes b7, there will be no way to prevent white from getting his shiny new queen with the promotion of that pawn on his next move. Nikolaitis declines the sacrifice and instead plays e4. It is a good try. He's now threatening to take the queen and then follow up with bishop to e5, guarding that promotion square on b8. Serper pushes his pawn to c7, threatening to promote on c8, but now comes e3, and along with it, a very serious threat. If white were to just promote his pawn now, then black has checkmate in 2 with e2 check, king takes f2, and e1 equals queen checkmate, which is why, after e3, Serper instead plays queen to d5 check. The king goes to f6, we have another check, king goes back to f7, at which point Serper decides to repeat the position here on move 39 with queen to d5 check, the purpose of which is undoubtedly just to get to move 40 without having to really think, since this is a classical game and as such he will be getting some time added to his clock on move 40. The king goes back to f6, obviously it can never move to the back rank since then white's pawn promotes with check, that would be bad. We now have queen to d6 check once again, but this time after king to f7, what do you think Serper plays? He of course sacrifices his last remaining piece with queen takes e7 check, and after king takes e7 and the promotion of the c-pawn, Serper has his new queen, and for the first time in over 20 moves, he's actually slightly up in material. The game goes on for a bit. We have bishop to h6, defending the pawn on e3. Makes sense, since black's only hope is going to be to try to make something happen with his two connected passers. But now comes a series of checks with queen to c5 check, king to e8, queen to b5 check, and now king to d8, a move which makes the win pretty straightforward for white. King to f7 staying close to the g6 pawn might have been a little more resilient, although still totally losing. But here, there's queen to b6 check, and after king to d7, the g6 pawn falls, the queen is attacking both bishop and knight. Nikolaitis tries one final trick with e2 check, and after king takes f2, he plays bishop to e3 check. And here's a final quiz position for you. What should white play? Well, obviously, king takes e3 would allow black to promote his pawn with check. That's no good. But slightly less obvious is that after king takes e2, there's knight to f4 check, forking king and queen. Serper is definitely not falling for that, and he now plays his only winning move, king to e1. At which point, Nikolaitis resigns the game. He could struggle on for a bit with something like knight to f4, but after queen to e4 attacking the bishop, everything is falling apart. I suppose black could try knight takes g2 check, defending, but after king takes pawn on e2, white's got about 4 pawns of extra material, and so it's just a matter of mopping up. So what a phenomenal, one-of-a-kind sacrificial masterpiece that was. I've never seen anything quite like it, but if you know of another game with this many 100% sound, engine-approved sacrifices by the winning side, please let me know about it in the comments, and if it's anywhere near as incredible as this game, there's a very good chance that I will cover it in a future video. But that's it for now. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel, hit that like button if you haven't already, leave a comment with any thoughts you might have, and I will see you soon.